Hi everyone, my name is Emily Pedrazzi, and today's AP Psychology topic will be Unit 3 Free Response Question Practice. If you're in the chat, just let me know if you've ever done a free response question in psychology or not. It just gives me a feel for what we need to cover. Make sure we follow @ThinkFiveable on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube before we get started, just to keep updated with psychology stuff and other topics if you're taking other AP exams. Now getting into the stream. Starting off, we'll have some free response question fundamentals, some stuff that applies to psychology specifically, but that can also be applied to multiple subjects, some strategies, and then we'll actually jump into the practice from a 2012 free response question. So moving into free response question fundamentals. Nearly every AP exam has at least one free response question with very few exceptions. One exception would be computer science, and then another research that doesn't even have an AP exam. After that, we have, for this AP psychology exam specifically, 2 free response questions, which will be worth 33% of your score, and you get 50 minutes. So you should use about 25 minutes a question, and then you can break that down further into the different parts. And then moving into that more, free response questions are multi-part questions. It'll often ask you a series of questions and you'll have to answer using parts A, B, C, D, etc. And then key skills that are listed on the College Board website are analysis, application, and then a definition of terms, concepts, experiments, etc. We'll move more into an acronym that'll help you understand this in a few slides. So starting off, we'll have ROW. For your free response question, you want to start off by reading, then outlining and writing. Make sure that you fully comprehend the question before you really start writing your free response question. And before that, it doesn't have to be like a big fancy outline, but just get some general ideas down so you're not just writing like off the seat of your pants. So some strategies. A good acronym is ROW with EDA. So read, outline, and write. And then within that, you want to identify concepts, define those concepts, and then apply them to various experiments, other terms, etc. It just provides a deeper understanding of the content and shows the exam graders that you know your stuff. After that, answer the question in complete sentences. You don't have to set the scene with an introduction, conclusion, or transitions. It's not an essay, like a 5-paragraph essay. You just want to answer the questions. And then after that, respond to all parts of the question, but you can skip around while you're outlining if you need to think more about certain parts. There's no penalty for guessing. And then EDA, identify, define, apply. We will get into that in the actual free response question practice. So the question that we'll be working with today is, for each of the following pairs of terms, explain how the placement or location of the first influences the process indicated by the second. So we're trying to link the first term's placement into how the process works of the second term. So we'll be working with example 1, which is rods and peripheral vision, then a list of unrelated words and some word recall, serotonin and a reduction of depression. As you might have noticed so far, these aren't all Unit 3 terms, but it has quite a few Unit 3 terms, which is why I chose this one. If you don't know all of the content, if you haven't gone over it, that's completely fine. We'll talk about that today. Then retinal disparity and depth perception, motor cortex and body movement, the presence of others and performance, and then lastly, proximity and perception. So next up, like diving into the first part, just restate the question. Rods and peripheral vision. What do you guys know about this so far? Just pop some answers in the chat. Don't worry about formatting it. We'll get more into the formatting later. Think of this as just like one big outline. I'll give you guys a minute to think, and then I'll pop up the answer on the screen and explain it. In the meantime, I will pull up the actual College Board response as well so that we can compare to that. Okay, if not, then the answer to this will be that rods are located on the side of the eye. You want to talk about the placement first. And then that leads to peripheral vision. This is a fairly short answer, but this is just like the foundational basis of what you want your answer to be. You can go further into depth using EDA, identify, define, apply. In this response, we've really only identified. But bonus points for using the peripheral vision, using terminology whenever you can, is a good idea on the exam. So part 2. We're going to be talking about how the positioning of a list of unrelated words can affect word recall. If you have any ideas about this, whether it's just some random stuff that you learned about it or formulated response, just pop it in the chat. So just one part is that the ability to recall is often better for words affected by the serial position effect. Notice how we've used vocabulary in here. We've used recall, serial position effect. We've completely answered the positioning part and not so much the process part, but we can get into that more with the expanded answer. The second part is that mnemonic devices and chunking are 2 strategies to assist with word recall. You want to identify like some strategies. That's kind of the A in EDA, the applying. And then lastly, this one's not a very good example, which is why I'm showing it. Short-term memory and long-term memory come into play while trying to recall terms after a certain amount of time. Yes, this response uses the terms, but at the same time, it's fairly vague and it doesn't really go into the specific processes. And then for part 3, same question, but we're going to be talking about the effects of serotonin, the positioning of serotonin on the reduction of depression. This wasn't really a Unit 3 concept, but bonus points if you get it. Ties in a little bit. Serotonin is linked with depression. The more there is, the less depressed you are. True. How can we incorporate the positioning of the placement of serotonin? Like, would it be possible to bring something about the neurotransmitters in there? The more specific that you can get with these, the better. So, like it was said in the chat, an increase in serotonin in the brain leads to a decrease in depression. This has to do with the neurotransmitters, and after that, antidepressants. It's also good to bring in specific examples when you can. The A in EDA apply. So antidepressants such as SSRIs are used to artificially increase serotonin in the brain or to induce natural production of serotonin. Notice the vocab words used. SSRI, serotonin, natural production, just the specifics of it. After that, we have part 4, which is the retinal disparity and depth perception. This should be a Unit 3 concept, but if you have any questions about it, let me know. Overall, though, there should be 7 parts for this. Most free response questions have around 7 parts, but not guaranteed. Okay, so the answer for this question. Each eye has a slightly different view, which is known as the retinal disparity. Disparity being the difference between each retina. It kind of provides a binocular effect that assists with depth perception. Oh, we have an answer in chat. Retinal disparity is the way that your left and right eyes see differently. The greater the disparity, the closer an object is to you, which creates depth perception. Good job, yeah, that's a very in-depth answer. That would be a good response for the free response question. The other answer that we have, oh, never mind. Moving on to part 5 then. So same question, but we're going to be talking about the placement of the motor cortex and its effects on the process of body movement. This is kind of a more complex one. There could be multiple answers for this, but might be kind of messy right now, but it's just more of an outline than anything. So we'll be going over the official College Board example responses. The motor cortex is located in the frontal lobe, and its primary role is to generate nerve impulses. And then we have one more. Motor cortex, located in the back of the frontal lobe, controls movement through neural impulses. Those are both very good answers. Answer 2 has a little bit more depth, though, regarding the specific process. It explains how the neural impulses control movement, or it links the two concepts together a little bit more. The answer that is on the slideshow is certain parts of the brain control motion for different parts of the body. This is an example of a poor answer. This answer is extremely vague. It doesn't use the terms. You always want to use the terms whenever you possibly can. This doesn't have motor cortex or body movement. It's just kind of a plain blah response. And then one more thing is damaged parts of the brain can have their functions fulfilled by neighboring parts due to plasticity. This response is also lacking the D in EDA. It doesn't really define what plasticity is. It's implied, but try to explain the definitions whenever you can. That'll help you get your score up. And part 6. So it's the presence of others and performance. Once again, not really a Unit 3 concept, but still extremely helpful to know. And some of the concepts have been vaguely touched over in previous units, depending on the order that you've gone in. Give you guys a minute or so for some responses, questions, etc. There's a bunch of different answers for this one. So, in the presence of others, performance is positively affected by social facilitation due to an increased sense of pressure. When you're around others, the pressure to perform is higher, which will positively impact performance in general. Not always the case, but that's the wide trend that's been observed. After that, performance is negatively affected by social loafing and the bystander effect. This is because of less pressure being applied when more people are present during a problem. The bystander effect basically states that the more people that are around, the less likely people are to help out. It's just, there's more people around, everyone expects somebody else to help and do the work. And so they just avoid doing anything themselves. And then social loafing is, say you have a group project versus an individual project. You're more likely to do like a higher amount of work or a higher quality of work when you're on that individual project, because you don't have other people to rely on. While in a group, it's more work. You're not expected to do as much just because it's supposed to be divided up. You might be more laid back with that in general. It's overall less performance, and there's more people, less performance, opposed to the... Okay, part 7. This is the last part of the free response question before we dive into the official responses. So here we'll be talking about proximity and perception, which kind of ties into what we talked about a little bit earlier, but just a little bit more in depth. Could have been a bad joke. Depth perception now. Or if you have any specific acronyms as well. We have RO with EDA, but that's just overall for free response questions. But if you have any acronyms for specific content, pop those in the chat as well. We perceive people or objections that are close together or in close proximity to be in a group. This is a law of Gestalt psychology. Yeah, that's a very good answer. That's one of the acceptable answers according to the site. Objects. There's multiple ways to answer the question, but that's just one of them. We'll go over the other two in just a moment here if we have no other responses. Okay, let's get into it then. So the relative proximity between 2 points affects the perception of size, shape, and sound. It's a fairly vague answer, but it gets the point across. You can still get a few points. And then the perception of a person or object is positively affected over time due to the mere exposure effect. That's a completely different approach to this question, but it still works as an answer. As well as the Gestalt psychology approach, which was in the chat that wasn't on the slideshow. And then after that, if there or any questions about previous content that we've gone over, or just anything in Unit 3, you can just use this as a review to discuss. Or even anything outside of Unit 3 as well, if you're having any trouble. And if not, then we can jump right into the official College Board response, which I will have up in just a second here. Slide before this one. Okay, so slide before this one was the presence of others and performance. If you have any specific questions about this one, let me know. Accommodation and adaptation. Oh, that's a good topic. Yeah, I'll discuss that one right after this. So this whole slideshow was this slide was talking about how performance is affected by the presence of others. Presence of others is the placement of other people, and then performance is the process. So performance is positively affected with social facilitation, which is when you have people around you facilitating and watching your moves. There's just more pressure in that situation overall, and a lot of people will often perform better in that environment. And then performance being negatively affected. There's a few different terms that we can throw in here. Social loafing, which is that group project. Like, you have more work to do in an individual project just because of the overall distribution of that. You're doing all the work because it's individual. Versus a group project where you have, say, like 3 or 4 other people with you, and there's less pressure to perform by either having a higher quality of work or just the amount of content that you produce. And then once again, we can go to the bystander effect. If there's an emergency going on, say you're in like a mall food court, and somebody's on the floor having a heart attack, there might be like 20, 30 people gathered around, but the more people that show up, the lesser the chance of that person getting help are. Just because when you have 30 plus people or however many people, you're just waiting on someone else to do it for you. Or you think, oh, someone's trained to handle this, they can do it just fine. And you're just less likely to have people be receptive of the event that's going on. And that just counts overall as the case study of the lady who was murdered and no one called. I've heard of a few like that. Yeah, and then there was another one. Oh, was it the lady that was murdered and then the baby was crying? Yeah, that's a great example. Another, like, apply for the EDA. There was a baby that was crying for a long period of time, much longer than they should have. Nobody called because everyone thought that it was under control, all the neighbors. I think this was an apartment, if I'm not mistaken. And nobody called, the lady was murdered. They found her days, if not like a week or more afterwards. Which is a good example of the bystander effect. There's a bunch more case studies like that. Extremely interesting to learn about. Okay, so the next topic. Let me check chat. Yeah, no, that's an extremely interesting case study. So what about accommodations and adaptations specifically do you want to know? Are you thinking in like an academic setting or just overall social environment? It's just very broad, but... Oh, the difference between them. Yeah, accommodation. So adaptation is it's more of a natural thing. You begin to adapt over time just to the surroundings around you. It's more of a natural process, while accommodation is... With accommodation, you're more likely to have people around you acknowledging it. You acknowledge that it's a thing. It's not just an evolutionary. It's a shorter term process that you can... I'm trying to think of the word. It's a short-term process that can be affected by the environment around you, while adaptation is the situations you've been in, the environment, etc. Think of it as people near the equator have developed skin with more melanin to avoid burning as easily, versus you have accommodations in class. You fill out the paperwork, you ask for those. It's more of a man-made process, and it's much more rapid. And if that didn't explain it well, just let me know and I can try approaching it from a different angle. Different thresholds, yeah, I can go over that. Just a second here, pull up a visual. It's a good concept to visualize. And with thresholds, do you have any specific area that you would like to discuss? Like visual, auditory, etc.? If not, that's completely fine. Absolute, okay. Yeah, let me pull up a visual for that one then. But overall, the absolute threshold, it depends on the... Oh, you read that. What are the purposes of the frontal lobe? Yeah, I'll get to that one after this. So the absolute threshold, it's like the smallest level of stimulus. So if you have, let's say like a slight change in the light. Let's say it's like a 10% change in the lighting. So it's like at least half the time it can be detected. Let's say that this can be detected 40% of the time. That would be below the absolute threshold, and the percentage of the change in light, sorry, I'm blanking. That's like the variable. That depends on, the stimulus depends on what you're talking about, and the absolute absolute threshold is that like halfway mark every time. Whether that's halfway like of something increasing or something decreasing, whatever is the halfway mark of that. And then the frontal lobe. Frontal lobe's kind of a complex one, but lobes are extremely important to know for the exam. I'll try to summarize just because it has so many different functions to it. It's extremely interesting. Yeah, the frontal cortex, it's like one of four different lobes, and then it's really good for like memory, motivation, small tasks. Attention is a big one as well. Memory is the main one that'll be discussed on the exam, like focus on memory and attention. But the purpose overall is just to fulfill cognitive functions. It's different in humans and animals, but you only really need to know animals for the exam, or humans for the exam. And then the complexity, just discussing like the size of the frontal lobe, sorry. Can't find a good visual, but overall, frontal lobe is great for like memory, attention. I don't think so far we've gone over memory much, actually. I think that's more next unit or the unit after. But just overall cognitive functions such as like not talking, sorry. I'm not really sure how else to explain it. It's so complex and difficult to summarize. The best thing that I can do though is say cognitive functions, memory, attention, those are big ones affected by the frontal lobe. Yes, the frontal lobe helps with decision making. That would be considered a cognitive process. And we can go further into cognitive processes as necessary. So starting off with the official College Board response, all the boxes are checked. This response earns full points. Keep in mind though that this is from 2012. The exam format, or not format, but the exam format, information, etc. might have changed a little bit since then. It starts off just no introduction, talking about where the rods are located. It's about I'd say it's like 5 or 6 lines. It's a fairly short response. You don't have to add a bunch of fluff in. Just get the information, identify the terms, define them, and then analyze. Or just add on to. The I in EDA can be fairly adaptable. It's just, in general, adding on more information or expanding on it. Could be IDE. Identify, define, expand. Just an example of the first response, which was how the positioning of rods affect peripheral vision. So the rods, which are located mainly on the outer regions of the eye and are responsible for light and dark, help with peripheral vision because they are on the outside of the... Sorry, it's a little hard to read. It's like the written text. Outside the eye can detect images on either side. Because the cones for color are located in the middle, his peripheral vision is not... Ooh, the handwriting. The peripheral vision does not have very much... I cannot identify the last word. Without the rods on the outside of the eye, we would not have the ability to see to the side while looking straight ahead. And then after that, it just jumps right into the second part, no transition. Word recall is influenced by the placement of the words because the person is more likely to remember the words listed at the beginning and ending of the list, and forget the ones that came in the middle. This response actually doesn't mention serial position effect, which is just... The response does a very good job of explaining why and like adding depth to it, but it doesn't specifically say serial position effect. If there's one thing that you want to get out of this, just every time that you're doing a free response question, incorporate terms wherever you can. But going back to that first part, it's extremely in-depth. It explains like what peripheral vision is. It goes into color a little bit. Then goes back to the rods. It's very concise. After the word recall one, we have the serotonin and depression. So people who lack the proper amount of serotonin will have depression. So by increasing the levels of serotonin the body has, this will reduce depression. The placement of serotonin in the synapse, which is another vocabulary term that's good to throw in, is important because this is where the receptor signals are. Depression... Oh, then if you misspell, another good thing to add. Showing the response. No, but I can. There we go. And you could possibly help me identify some of the stuff that's hard to read, just because the handwriting is a little messy. Let me just... And if you need to go back just to have like the visual of it, let me know. For now, though, I'm going to skip down to the fourth part. Also, before moving on, important thing to note, this response is 2 pages long. You don't have to write a super long essay. And then the next response as well marked all the points, but it scored slightly less. This was also 2 points. And then scrolling down to the next example, it's 4 pages, but it doesn't hit all the points, and it's fairly low on the scoring. It's harder to read, but the issue here was that they didn't go into depth about the process. Then if there's any other examples, come to those later, but for now let's look at the high scoring example. And once again, it's barely even 2 pages. It's like a page and a half. You don't have to write this huge thing, just get the point across, don't add fluff. Going into retinal disparity. So we have retinal disparity is the process in which your 2 eyes see different images and your brain works to combine the 2 images. This is going kind of for a Gestalt approach to it. This relates to depth perception because when the images are closer, the 2 images have greater difference and the brain must work harder to combine them. Location of the eyes on the face influences depth perception because the ground... Ooh, having a hard time reading that one. Further, when people are standing apart, appear further because the physical difference is greater. Yeah, the handwriting's a little rough. But overall, this was decent response, as you can see before. Last line, serotonin in the synapse to the receptors sites and thus reduce depression. And then we go right into retinal disparity. No transition, no fluff, keeping it short and simple. The next part of the response. The motor cortex in the brain, which has different sized representative areas for different parts of the body, controls the movement of the body. Body movement that requires more muscle movement is more largely represented in the motor cortex than other parts. The hand, the face are too overrepresented because they have muscles to move. It's fairly short. It doesn't really incorporate much vocabulary. It just, you have motor cortex, you have body movement, which is restating what the question had, but this person could have gone a little bit further in depth. After that, we have jumping right into social facilitation. So the social facilitation effect, where people perform better at, nope, can't read that. They are good at when others are around. So the presence of others being close to the person performing the action increases the performance of whatever is being displayed. So they use the term there, which is good. Answers the first part of the question. They didn't really expand on the contrary side, though, which would be the negatives, or when performance would be negatively affected through like social loafing or the bystander effect. It was still fun, and it scored full points, but just to be on the safe side, as much information as you can without jeopardizing the time that you have. And then the last subject. This is one of the longer ones. Proximity is how close something is to another thing. Objects are closer to each other than the brain. If objects are closer to each other, then the brain is more likely to see them as being grouped together. For example, several X's are clumped together, will be preserved, seen, perceived, seen as a group rather than independent X's. In retinal disparity, that's kind of bringing back the term from the, I believe, the fourth part of the question, relating to depth perception when the pupils in the eyes are closer together. When the pupils in the eye are closer together, the object is closer. When the pupils are further apart, the object is further away. Physical difference in the eyes is translated into the brain causing the depth perception. Overall, this was a fairly clean response. You don't really see any notes in the margins at any point compared to the next one. If you have notes in the margins, that's completely fine as well. The only things that are scored are what's listed on what's written on the actual section. I'm going to skip the mid-performance one and go down to the bottom one just to point out any mistakes. So this one is the lowest scoring. Here they missed like the presence of others, the performance, proximity perception, and then they didn't really explain the process. It's very likely that this person ran out of time. Yeah. The ending sentence kind of shows the running out of time. Proximity of objects will result in a Kind of hard to read. Of details. The closer an object is, different perception of details. The closer an object is, the more accurate the perception will be. It's fairly vague. It didn't really use many vocabulary terms. It used proximity and perception, but it didn't really go in depth about the process and the correlation between. And then there's some official commentary below as well. So the first one got a 7. The second one, which was the mid-perform that we skipped over, would be a 4. And then at the end, the last one will be a 2. So just going into the official College Board response. The essay received no credit for point 1 because the student does not indicate the rods of the peripheral area. Rods are located in the peripheral area of the eye or retina. In this, you have to specifically pay attention to the details of the question. If you didn't state the location or positioning of something in terms of the positioning of something, then you don't score the point. Point 2 was awarded, and point 2 was the go back on the slideshow really quick. Excuse me if I'm losing my voice, I was a little sick. Point 2 was the list of unrelated words and word recall, so overall just the serial position effect. This person got that one just fine. And then point 3, student didn't earn the point. They didn't state the correlation between serotonin levels and depression. They might have defined it, but they never really established that correlation. And then in point 5, no credit. No specific body movement, voluntary muscle, or mapping of the body as described. In the acronym EDA, they kind of missed the A. They didn't really analyze further and explain and apply the concepts. Point 6, they didn't earn point 6. An appropriate psychological concept is not named. If we go back to that, just give it just a second. You can find it. Yeah, the presence of others in front of a... The presence of others in front of a performance... This one's hard to read. It's in front of the stage. Could greatly influence the performance. Some performers feel their sympathetic reactions take place in a full house, causing a lesser performance, or better performance. However, some performers are nervous at the idea of others watching their performance, and they are going to give a worse performance. There's no social facilitation, no social loafing, bystander effect. None of that was named. They didn't use specific terms in that case. And then last off, they did earn 0.7. They addressed proximity. They addressed the properties of the object. They talked about size, for example. But yeah, overall, out of 7 points total, just points based on each part of the question since there were 7. The first answer earned 7, second got 4, last got 2. Formatting might be slightly outdated once again, just because it's 2012 exam, but if you haven't, I'd still recommend taking the previous exams just to get a feel for the concepts, since a lot of it hasn't really changed that much. And if there are any further questions, just let me know. Otherwise, that should be it for now. And there will be another Unit 4 free response question coming out soon, probably the end of November. Great, thank you for attending. And you can reach out to me additionally on different platforms if you need any assistance, and I'll be glad to help, since it's a little bit easier one-on-one with text. Yeah, thank you everyone. Have a good night.